Welcome to the Writecast podcast, a podcast to help actors find auditions and book roles. I'm your host, Ashley Scott Myers. Today we have Courtney Gains. Courtney began his career in the 80s with such classic films as Children of the Corn and Back to the Future. He's continued to be a working actor now for decades, and in this interview we're going to dig into the early part of his career, how he got cast in some of those early films. We're going to get some of his thoughts on child acting. He started as a child when he began his acting career and did have some success early. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of get his thoughts on child actors. And we're going to talk about some of his more recent films and how he's been able to maintain his career now over 4 decades. So stay tuned for that interview. Since I started this podcast, I've been getting some emails from actors asking how they can audition for my films. I'm actually happy to look at actors that listen to the podcast, but I'm not casting anything right now. So if you send me an email, it'll probably just get lost before I'm actually doing any casting again. So I set up a short form for you to fill out, and then I'll have your information on hand when I do begin to put my next project together. So if you're interested in potentially being considered for a role in my next project, just go to www.thewritecast.com/casting. And it's all one word, it's all lowercase, and it's just casting, CASTING. So now let's dig into today's interview with Courtney Gains. Here is the interview. Welcome, Courtney, to the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Yeah, nice to be here. How you doing?
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get your first break being cast in Children of the Corn? Maybe just sort of take us up through that period of your life and get us to the point where you were cast in Children of the Corn.
Sure. So I was born in Los Angeles, not, in the, Beverly Hills area.
Mm-hmm.
Born, technically on the wrong side of the tracks near Dodger Stadium, which probably doesn't mean a lot to people, but down by the LA River.
Gotcha.
And I got the bug for acting when I was 10. I was in this after school program with all the tough kids and from the broken homes. The parents had to work 2 jobs. And this lady was a teacher named Miss Gardner, who was by far the toughest bird of them all, which we respected her because of that, got us to do theater. Huh. And just to give an example of how crazy that was, she had us do one play in drag where she got the toughest guy in school to play the lead.
Wow.
How about that?
Wow.
And this was like the 70s. This was out of the box. But we all jumped in once he got in because we'd say like, "Oh, you think it was funny? We were interested. Let me go tell Frankie he thinks that's funny." And they'd be like, "No, please." I'm like, "God, okay." So, but the first play we did was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I was originally a dwarf, and then I was cast as the prince because the guy passed. They didn't want to do it, and I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to have to kiss the girl. I was like 10 years old. She's like, basically like, "You're gonna do it," and so I did. And getting out on those boards, I can't explain it. It was like something familiar, something felt like home. And then, when Kiss the Girl and Snow White comes alive and the crowd applauds, I was hooked. So I started really bugging my parents at that point. My mother, though, had been in the USO and at a very young age and was like kind of reluctant for me to be a child actor. And in hindsight, that was probably a blessing. But I did keep bugging her. And at 13, she finally put me in a workshop, a class, and I hated the class. It was like tights and tap dancing. You understand, I'm a kid from, a hood rat, basically. Like, this is not what I was talking about. And so I was about to quit. And I picked up about 3 classes. I was like, I don't fit in here. This is not what I meant. And this guy stopped my mom and I on the street after the class. And he said, "Hi, my name is Virgil Fry. I'm an actor, but I'm also an acting coach. And I think your son has a great look. How does he like this class?" And I was like, "I don't know about this guy." He said, "My son's on this audition next door." And she kept talking to us. And then his son came out. And I immediately recognized his son. His name's Sean Fry. And in the 70s, he was a working kid actor. He was in the original film with Dick and Jane. I saw him in Movies of the Week with Elizabeth Montgomery. And I thought to myself, well, if his son's working and, he must know what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And so I started studying with him at 13. And it was a real class, like a real gritty class, method acting, stuff I could really dig into that I liked. And it was really also really unique about the class was that it wasn't a kid class. It was kids and adults mixed. And for me, that was way, way better. Number one, I got along with adults sometimes better than I got along with my peer group. But when you work with all just kids, which I've trained a lot of young actors too, there's a sort of a cutesiness and BS that goes on where when you're working with adults, that doesn't happen. The kids bring the imagination, the adults bring the experience. But you also can pair them, in improvs and things. Because what do kids deal with the most when they're growing up? Their parents. They're dealing with authority figures, right? So it's a great place to create conflict as well. So that was a great class. And then Virgil Fry eventually became my manager. But first, he just really helped me get into business, finding agents and everything, and training me. And everybody kept saying when I turned 18, I was going to blow up because the emancipation laws back then where you had to be 18 to work a full day. So the idea was to be 18 and look 15. And so I was looking 15, and I had 5 years training under my belt. And as soon as I turned 18, I just didn't stop working for like 6 years. And the first big break was Children of the Corn. And the story there is that when I went into the audition, the guy who was the reader, who went on to become a very successful casting director, Jeff Goldberg, tells the story. I pulled a knife on him, a fake knife, but he didn't know that. Which is not something I recommend anybody does, but he always tells people not to do. But I was young and hungry, and it helped leave an impression. And it helped me get me the job.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. So let's just talk about child acting just for a second. I'd love to get your perspective on this. What are some things you've seen in with child actors where the parents do things really right, some good things, and then we'll take the flip side. What are some things that parents need to look out for if they start pushing their child to be a child actor?
Oh, gosh, it's hard to say what they do right.
Well, there must be some things like, it sounds like your parents, they didn't let you do a lot of these things until you turned 18, and you sort of thought that was maybe a little bit of a blessing. So maybe that's one thing to look at.
Well, I think the thing with my parents, so if you do right is to just support your kid in whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. That's what any parent can do right? And that's what I wanted to do. And they could see that I would be coming back from these classes excited. And so, they scrounged up the money, and sometimes they'd have to go to my brother and get him to kick in, and because they could see that I loved it, so they just supported what I was doing, but they didn't in any way, I would say the word encourage or push me toward, whereas most young kid actors, it's their stage parent that's pushing them toward it. It's something that they wanted that they didn't get, so then they want their kids to achieve that goal. And then what's even worse is when a kid actually starts working. And, for example, Virgil Fry's daughter was Soleil Moon Fry, Punky Brewster. Now, she chose it because she was around that environment. Her half-brother, Mino Palouse, worked a ton in the 80s, just like series to series. And so she just grew up in it and decided she wanted to do it. And that's a little bit of a different ball of wax. But most of these kids, their parents are sort of pushing them into it. And that's where. And then what's scary though is if they start making money, even say like in Soleil's case, or another friend of mine who passed away last year, Christophe St. John, who had a stellar television career. Last 15 years was on Young and the Restless. Won a couple of daytime Emmys on there. They had this tremendous amount of pressure at a young age to be providers. Mm-hmm. And that's where it gets dangerous. Yeah. When they, as a child, for two reasons. One, it's an enormous amount of pressure, but two, it's an enormous amount of power. When you're the provider, your parents aren't the provider. That's not natural. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it's a weird game.
Yeah.
And then, as a kid, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say that's some real good insight. I totally agree. It's the dynamic really is not, as you say, it's sort of an unnatural dynamic between parents and kids.
It is. And then on top of it, say like you are like a kid, like say like in Soleil Moon's example, she's the lead of the series, she's like, like the top female kid actor. And then all of a sudden that series is over after everybody's been like telling you how great you are and blowing smoke up your ass for the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. Series done. Everybody moves on to their next job. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not healthy either. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's not real, other than it leads to a real hard lesson when your hot people love you and when you're not, they're on to the next. Right. So I just don't think that's a real healthy environment for kids. So I say hindsight, I'm glad that my career didn't happen till later, because there were a lot of kids in the acting class I was in within a year or 2 years were working. And what they did after that is stop studying. They thought they had arrived. And so I studied for 5 years before I got my first break. And then I never stopped studying. I stayed in that class for another 5 years. So I worked with my mentor for 10 years before I broke off and tried other things, and also taught myself, which he helped train me to do. So for really my whole career, I was either in a class or teaching a class. And I think that that's how I've, been able to make the transition from, teen actor to adult actor.
Yeah. That's some great insight. So let's talk about some of your recent credits. You and I got hooked up, this new film coming out called Queen Bees. You have a role in that. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. What is that project all about, and how did you get involved with it?
So what it's about is about a woman, Ellen Bernstein, who goes into a retirement home for a little while they're supposed to fix her house up. And then what happens is the house catches on fire and she has to live there. And she realizes that that whole scene is like high school, but, everybody's older. And so that's what the movie's about. But she finds love. That's the good side of it. My character is just a cameo. I'm a guy who basically steals her purse at a coffee house with this clique that she's now getting involved with. And they stand up to me, and it kind of helps them bond. But for me, I got into it because Michael Lembeck, the director, I study in a workshop that his sister Helene Lembeck teaches. It's called the Harvey Lembeck Comedy Workshop, which of course is their father, who had a very prolific career in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and trained a lot of amazing people in that class. It was a comedy class. And
Gotcha.
When I heard about the project, I approached Michael. He also teaches there part-time when he's not directing. And he said, I basically was like, here's a part. It's not big, but here, but I was like, I can work with Ellen Bernstein, Anna Margaret, Loretta Devine, and Jane Curtin. I'm like, I'm in.
Yep.
So it was just great to get to work with those iconic actresses for the day. I had a really good time.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious, what is it? It sounds like this is sort of a previous relationship, but what is it just sort of in general, and maybe you can be specific with this project, that kind of gets you fired up with the script? Obviously, this thing already had cast and that sort of attached, but are there some things that you could pick out from the script that you noticed and you liked?
It depends on the size of the project. I mean, being that this was just a cameo, I really didn't get into it. I don't need to know the rest of the script, to be honest. I just need to know my part and how it relates to the movie. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And
if it's a bigger part, then I need to know the whole script. And what am I looking for in a script? Essentially, if that's what you're asking for,
exactly.
I'm looking for two things: something I can believe, like it can be in outer space, or it can be a horror film, but I gotta believe it. You know what I mean? It's like, if it's like Charlie's Angels, and in the first 2 minutes they're jumping out of helicopters with no parachute, I'm like, come on, man. That ain't happening, right? So that's why I like doing real stories. I like doing period pieces, because like a Memphis Belle or something like that, because they're things I can believe in, And the second thing you're looking for is the best arc you can find as an actor, right? You want the best arc you can find, or the best, turn of events you can find, right? The best surprise twist or whatever you can find that you as the actor then have to deal with, right? The element of shock or surprise, right?
Yeah. And I'm curious, let's go through some of your other films. You mentioned right before we started the interview, you had a bunch of other films. It sounds like COVID has kind of put a lot of these films under wraps. Now that COVID is opening up, it sounds like things are getting released. Talk about some of your new films. What else do you have coming out in the next couple months?
Sure. So I have a horror film that just came out on Amazon Prime called Await the Dawn. That's got Dee Wallace and Vernon Wells, and it's a pretty cool project. And I played a doctor who was like a doctor, a therapist with for drug rehab and stuff like that. So fun and different. And how did you get cast in that character one? There. How I got cast in that one was the director had approached me through another friend who I was working on a different project with, and asked me to take a read of the script, and I liked it, and I did it. It's nice you can get an offer. When you get an offer, that goes a long way, and so that one was an offer. The next project is a project called River, and that's coming out July 13th, and it's described as a psychological sci-fi thriller, and I think that's fair because it has sci-fi elements, but it's not like in space, and there's not a lot of CGI. It's literally 5 people in the movie, and what it's about is this girl who comes back to her hometown after her mother mysteriously dies, and then starts having time lapses. And my character's name is Dr. Michael Glenn. He's a friend of the family's, but he starts doing therapy sessions with her to try to figure out what's going on. And it's again, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to get these, professionals, the therapists and things like that. So
yeah. And how did you get cast in the River?
The casting director knew my work, and through dealing with my manager and such, and then this film was shot in North Carolina, and I'm spending some of my time now in the Southeast. When they found out they could grab me out here, because it was it was a small project, that was a big boost that they could get me on the East Coast.
Gotcha.
So that kind of just right place. The next movie is a movie called Charming the Hearts of Men, and that's coming out August 13th. And that's a movie set in the 50s, loosely based on a true story of this woman who had a big hand in getting the word woman put in the civil rights bill. It's just pretty wild. I play a character named Mr. Spratz, who is this owner of this diner where she ends up having to work. Her character was a debutante who then loses her father and then finds out they have no money, and then she has to work. And when she works, she starts seeing the reality of the segregation, and she allows a bunch of black folk to do a sit-in at this diner that ends up becoming a real story in history and the news. And then she gets involved in civil rights. And so it's a pretty cool project, and I'm glad it's finally coming out. And I got cast on that through an audition, through a self-tape audition.
Okay. Perfect. I'm curious. I want to go.
It was one of the ones, when you do them, you say, I can get this job. I'm right for this job. And I got that one. So.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm curious with River, you mentioned that you were in the Southeast. I actually had another actor on the podcast previously, and he's in Louisiana, and he does a lot of that too. He gets these local hires. He doesn't have near your resume. So I'm curious if this is something you would recommend to actors that maybe we're trying to break in. Do you think it's easier for them to get roles? I mean, obviously you have a big resume, so it's a little bit of a different situation, but would you recommend that a actor, stay in the Southwest? Could he get some of those local hire roles and maybe be a little less competitive than moving out to LA?
I would say that it's actually, now that I'm doing both, right? I'm out here in the Southeast and I'm in LA, but I've been doing the Southeast thing now for about 3 years. It is not any easier, to be honest. It's also competitive. But there are a lot of opportunities, and I think that that's what you have to really focus on. Part of what had me made the move is I felt there was a real drop in auditions for me in 2017, and I think that was a combination of age, and I also think it was a combination of, I think there's a lot more ethnic work out there now, which is a good thing, but I think it's been affecting pasty white boys like myself a little bit. Like a lot of people I know, white guys in their 50s, have been struggling a little bit. So I was like, I need to figure out a way to boost my auditions. And for me, if I can get, 30 auditions a year, I can do 3 jobs a year. That's sort of like been my average. And so if I'm only getting 20 auditions a year, that's really hurting my bottom line. So I had to figure out a way to shift the game, right? And open up the. But I think if you are already someone in the Southeast, right? It's not just Atlanta. It's a 500-mile range from Atlanta, right? Like there's work going on in Kentucky because there's incentives in Kentucky now. There's work going on in Oklahoma because there's incentives there. There's obviously work going on in Louisiana. So there's a lot of, Atlanta. There's a lot of work in Atlanta, but there's a lot of work near it, Mississippi, there is work, even Alabama. So like there's a lot going on in this whole Southeast region, and it's not a bad way to get yourself started. And then also, like, I'll give you an example of a guy I know who was an Asian actor who ended up being able to start to build his resume in the Southeast because there just wasn't that many Asian actors out here. So he was able to build the beginning of his resume and then use that to then catapult his LA work. So it depends on what you bring into the party, right? As well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm curious too. On their IMDb page, you have a number of producing credits, executive producer, co-producer credits. One of your more recent credits, Candy Corn. You also did a movie called 911. I'm curious, why does an actor like yourself, why do you begin to produce? And maybe you can sort of talk about what you actually did with those productions as an actor and producer.
Yeah. So, basically as an actor, it's feast or famine. Sometimes you're busy and sometimes you're not. And when you're not, you can just sit there twiddling your thumbs. You can do other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've always, look for projects I could be part of to develop, and special projects that perhaps have me in them or whatever. And I've been pretty good at like being like a bridge guy, right? Like say like I meet somebody on a film that wants to get in the film business who's a real estate developer, and they're like, yeah, I'd like to, if there's a right project, I'm like, maybe I'm looking for a horror project. So then I'll find a horror project and put those two people together and get a movie done.
Gotcha.
Right. So that's pretty much how I've behaved as a producer is just most people are trying to get their thing done. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's nothing wrong with that, but that's also can be very tough. It's like, it's all about like, do my thing. Whereas I'm looking at like, where's the fit? Right? Mm-hmm. Where's the fit? And then, for example, in Candy Corn, though, what happened with that is I came in just as an actor. I liked what I was seeing out of the director and the DP, but they ended up, like many independent movies, they ended up falling short on their funding. I felt it was a project worth doing, so I helped find a little bit of bridge money where we shot some more footage, and then that ended up being enough for them to secure the rest of their financing.
Gotcha.
But I also shot some of it in LA, so I obviously that's my territory. This guy's from Ohio, so I took over handling production in Ohio, LA, because I could bring the team together there and get the good deals on trailers and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
So just from being around, right?
Yeah.
Just from being in LA all these years, I know a few people. So so sometimes it ends up being by necessity that I come on. And 9/11, actually, that story is a bit of a rough story. I got approached by somebody from years and years ago who had this really good script, and I brought it to this guy Martin Gigi, who's a producer director, who I'd worked with before on a project called Benny Bliss and Disciples of Greatness. So I also was a producer on it. He put that whole thing together. I didn't own the rights to it though, but I thought I could count on him, so I gave it to him, and I ended up getting kind of pushed to the side by the end because I didn't own the rights. So I have I think I have an associate producer credit in that. I didn't have a lot of sway in that,
Gotcha.
Like they ended up doing a lot of rewrites and stuff that I wasn't still, but I did get a credit. I did get, a little bit of a buyout, and, that happens sometimes. And, that's the hard thing I've learned about producing is, who owns the script, who owns the property has the say. Yeah. Money talks and bullshit walks, basically.
Yeah, of course. So I'm curious at this stage of your career, like you just went through River and Awaiting Dawn, some of these different movies. It sounds like some of them, you mentioned there's 30 auditions a year. You can generally get 3 gigs out of 30 auditions. How many of your actual gigs these days come through networking and personal relationships versus an agent or a manager? And then how many, auditions come that way as well? I'd just be curious to kind of hear sort of how you're actually landing these gigs a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It ebbs and flows, but if I had to pick a percentage, I'd probably say it's 65-60% of just going out auditioning, doing self-tapes and auditioning, and I'd say it's like 30-35% of offers.
Gotcha.
And it also depends on your team. Like my manager, Chris Rowe, he has a pretty good clientele, right? He has a couple big dogs like a Malcolm McDowell and like that, right? Where that guy, he just gets straight offers. Like he hasn't had to audition in like 40 years, right? He's Malcolm McDowell. But sometimes we get the trickle down theory. Like, or say they come after Malcolm McDowell and they find out how much Malcolm McDowell costs. And then he can go, well, for that money, I can get you a Courtney Gains.
Gotcha.
And so sometimes it happens that way. So that's good to have a team that has some projects coming their way. Sometimes you can get some things that way, or relationships that he's formed over the years because he does have a number of working actors like a Bruce Davidson or people like that, and so it's a little bit of both. And then and I have an agent in Atlanta as well who's Phil's doing a great job at Stewart Talent, and they get there's a lot of auditions out here. But what I've found out here is, whereas in LA, I would say I can average 1 out of 10, which is a very good rate, actually. But out here, it's not been that. You have to do a lot of auditions to get a job, and it's nothing personal. It seems to be the way it works.
Yeah,
From
that's
people I've
interesting.
talked to, working actors, are like, you have to do like 30 auditions to get a job. So it's a lot of footwork.
Yeah, for sure. So I always like to just wrap up these interviews by asking the guest if they've seen something recently that they thought was really great. Maybe something that went a little under the radar, Netflix, Hulu, HBO. Is there anything recently you've watched that you thought maybe could use a little extra attention?
Yeah, I don't know if maybe you'll be able to help me remember the name of it. The Baz Luhrmann miniseries a few years ago. I thought it was a Amazon thing where it was about sort of the burgeoning of rap in Brooklyn.
Okay, I don't remember.
What is the name of that thing?
Yeah, no, but I'm sure we can. We'll figure it out. No, Baz Luhrmann, Amazon show. Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I do sort of vaguely remember, but I didn't watch it.
I cannot think of the name of it. It made the kid broke out. The kid that was the lead, he broke out after that. But I thought that, honestly, is the best thing I've seen in years. It was just so creative and so interesting how they put it together. But I mean, Baz Luhrmann's up there on the list of guys I don't want to work for sure. I just think he's really interesting how he uses music to tell stories. I can't believe I'm blanking on it right now, but I was really impressed with that miniseries.
Yeah, for sure.
It was really supposed to be more, but I think I heard that he eventually just sort of lost interest in it, and then they had to sort of can it. It was supposed to have a season 2, but season 1 was really, really good.
Gotcha. And tell me a little bit about your music. It sounds like you have an album or a song coming out here recently.
Yeah, so I got 2 things going on musically. So I have a solo project called Acoustic Gains, Volume 1, and a song just came out today called Let It Ride, which is a very vintage acoustic blues vibe song. That's the 3rd single I've put out on that so far.
Perfect.
And that's been cool. Just really stripped down acoustic, kind of harkens back to like the 70s when they used to have a lot of acoustic in the music they did. And the second project is I have a band called Ripple Street, and we put out 3 singles this year, and the last single we put out about a month ago was called Would You, and I would say it's like, to say it sounds Black Sabbath-esque would not be too far a reach, so much more heavy rock sound. So it's fun to have 2 projects where I can do stuff that's more personal and intimate and still do some stuff that's rocking hard. And you can find all this stuff on Spotify and Amazon and Deezer and even YouTube Music.
Perfect. Is there any other sites you use, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, that you want to share? I will round up those for the show notes as well.
Sure. If you want to find me, the best way is to find me on my Facebook. I tell people you'll be able to, if there's other ones that you'll be able to find which one's me, because there's like current stuff that you couldn't get otherwise.
Gotcha.
And then I also have an Instagram. But Facebook's the best way to find me, and I don't do a Twitter.
Gotcha. Courtney, well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today. Good luck with all of these projects.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.
Hey, thank you. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right, bye.
If you enjoyed this interview, do check out my other podcast over at sellingyourscreenplay.com, where I've got hundreds of interviews. They're mostly with producers, directors, and writers, but there are some great interviews with actors as well. But even the episodes with directors, producers, and writers, I think often have a lot of good information in those interviews for actors as well, even if it's just to understand that part of the business better. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review anywhere you find this podcast. You can probably leave a review, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or just retweet it or share it on Facebook. These reviews and shares are very helpful to let the various platforms know what people think of the podcast. And with some good reviews, it can really help get the podcast in front of more people. So if you have a minute and wouldn't mind just leaving a nice review, it would be very much appreciated. That's the show. Thank you for listening.